We've explored the roadblocks to true understanding, the ways our minds can be distorted, the flaws in how we seek truth. But what happens when we turn that inquiry inward, not just to understand reality, but to define it? What if the ultimate freedom, the ultimate act of intellectual rebellion, is to declare that you, and you alone, will forge your own values, create your own morality, stand above the common understanding? It's a dazzling, powerful idea. The ultimate individual, beholden to no ancient code, no external authority, no inherited notion of good or bad. Stripping away the layers of tradition, expectation, and convention to stand naked in the universe and say, I will determine what is right. I will shape the meaning of virtue for myself and potentially for others. This path promises liberation. It promises authenticity. It promises a strength born of self-reliance. But is it the path to genuine wisdom and flourishing? Or is it a path paved with the very errors we discussed, leading not to transcendence, but to a kingdom of distortions and corrupted ideals? Let's consider this figure, the one who seeks to be the master of their own values, the shaper of their own good. This act of self-creation is undertaken by a human mind. And as we know, the human mind is not a perfect instrument. It is, as was observed centuries ago, an uneven mirror, inherently prone to certain distortions. When the self-creator looks within, seeking to find the bedrock upon which to build their new values, they inevitably look with the eyes they have. And those eyes are already subject to what could be called internal biases. There are biases wired into the very fabric of human perception and thought. We naturally seek patterns, sometimes where none exist. We are drawn to evidence that confirm what we want to believe, or what we have already started to suspect, often ignoring crucial counter-evidence. We generalize wildly from a few striking examples that capture our imagination, assuming the rest of the universe must conform. We tend to overlook the subtle, hidden complexities, the underlying causes, focusing only on what is immediately visible or emotionally resonant. So, when the self-creator delves within, trying to find pure, unadulterated truth to base their values on, they risk merely building upon the shaky ground of these ingrained human tendencies. Their new values may simply be old biases in disguise, a preference for order becoming a rigid, unnatural code, a focus on the affirmative becoming a blind spot to negative consequences for others, a generalization from limited personal experience becoming a universal demand. Adding to this are the biases unique to each individual, the specific cave of their personal history, their temperament, their fortunate or unfortunate experiences, their private desires and fears. The values they forge in this fire may simply be reflections of personal wounds, unresolved issues, or selfish inclinations, elevated to the status of universal law by the self-creator, who is ironically blind to their own specific distortions. The values they deem highest may simply be whatever most allures and captivates their understanding, regardless of whether it aligns with any objective reality beyond their subjective experience. But the errors don't just come from within. Even the act of articulating these new values, communicating them, thinking them through, relies on tools that carry their own distortions, the tools of language and inherited thought.
We think and speak in words, words developed by communities over time, often for common purposes, not for precise, objective description of ultimate reality or abstract concepts. These words come with ingrained associations, vague definitions, and arbitrary divisions that may not correspond to the true nature of things. When the self-creator tries to define concepts like good, strength, freedom, or value anew, using this flawed instrument, they risk merely falling into the trap of arguing over ill-defined terms, creating confusion and empty controversies even within their own mind. Furthermore, even in rejecting old systems, the self-creator is influenced by inherited frameworks and fictitious tales. These are the stage plays of past philosophies, the elegant theories that presented a version of reality as their authors wished it to be, not as it is. Even if explicitly dismissed, the structures, the categories, the ways of thinking from these traditions can subtly shape the very raw material the self-creator uses. They might build their values based on a flawed theory of human nature, or a wrong-headed method of justifying their claims, borrowed unconsciously from the very systems they sought to transcend. They might, for example, base everything on a narrow set of personal experiments or experiences, overgeneralizing wildly, much like those who built entire philosophies on too little data. So, the act of creating one's own values is undertaken by a flawed mind, using flawed tools, often standing on ground subtly shaped by flawed traditions. What happens then to those qualities we previously discussed? The virtues we called hard, adherence to principles, courage, deep hope, fulfilling one's role, integrity and truthfulness. If values are fluid, subject to the individual's will, then where are the a priori principles to which one is obedient, even when difficult? Principles become mere strategies, discarded when inconvenient. Courage might devolve into mere assertion of will, a refusal to acknowledge fear or vulnerability, rather than acting rightly despite fear. Deep hope, rooted in trust in something beyond the self, becomes fragile optimism, dependent on the self-creator's own success. Fulfilling a given role or duty becomes meaningless if the only authority is the self. And integrity? If truth is whatever aligns with the self-created value system, then truthfulness might twist into self-justification, and promises hold only as long as they serve the current, potentially shifting will of the Creator. Now consider the virtues we called soft. Deep connection and loyalty, humility, generosity, compassion, and self-sacrificial love. These virtues inherently point away from the self. Loyalty is to another. Humility is self-forgetfulness. Generosity and compassion are directed outwards. Self-sacrificial love, charity, means valuing something or someone else more than your own comfort or even life. For the self-creator, whose ultimate project is the assertion and shaping of the self and its values, these virtues become deeply problematic. Humility, the very essence of self-forgetfulness, is the opposite of a philosophy centered on the will to power of the self. Relationships risk becoming transactional, valued only as they affirm or serve the self-created purpose, making deep loyalty illogical. Compassion and mercy might be seen as weaknesses, hindrances to forging strength or achieving one's goals. And self-sacrificial love? Why would the ultimate value sacrifice itself for anything else? The very idea seems a contradiction to the premise of supreme self-valuation.
The result is not necessarily a monster, though it can be, but an understanding that is fundamentally flawed, detached from the deeper realities of human connection, objective truth, and perhaps the very nature of goodness itself. The mastery they achieve might be total, but it is mastery over a world of their own making, a world built on distorted mirrors, shadowy caves, confused language, and borrowed, ill-fitting scripts. Perhaps the true strength, the true wisdom, lies not in declaring oneself the sole architect of value, but in the difficult, humble work of purging the mind of its distortions, understanding the limits of our tools, and seeking values grounded in a reality that exists beyond the confines of the self.